Hello YouTube! Let's learn more about the mysterious. Today we are learning about Arcane. So, the before reading knowledge is that Rachel Downs, or currently known by her identity Arcane, is a character that makes an appearance in the Creepypasta story The Past Should Stay Buried, which we're reading because I can. Rachel Margaret Downs graduated high school just a week before her disappearance from the meager home. That's interesting. From her meager home. Jesus. Over time, when she lived with her parents, she apparently caused them some extreme paranoia on top of obvious trickery to make her parents believe she had some form of higher power. Rachel now takes on a life of crime as a cruel, manipulative serial killer under the pseudonym as Arcane. So, her personality. Rachel is a quite calculating individual when on the job. Hunting makes her paranoia act up considerably until she has the individual at her disposal. In regular conversation, she enjoys being in charge as well. She doesn't mind taking small calculated losses if they are in favor of her larger goals. Also, MZ, shush. I did press the button. Rachel is a young woman in her early 20s. She has choppy dyed black hair and pale cream skin. Her left eye is slate gray, while her right eye is the brown prosthetic. You'll understand that later. Also, I know. Rachel's usual outfit is a fully patterned t-shirt under a black leather jacket with black leather knee-high boots and tan pants. When stalking, she prefers jeans and either a hoodie, hat, or a scarf to hide her features. Her stalking clothes vary immensely as she shoplifts them whenever needed and disposes of them frequently. Rachel even shows a few scars on her face and body. She has a scar from a fall on her right knee, a bullet and a stab scar on her right shoulder, light scarring around her right eye, and a burn scar on her left forearm. Facts. Arcane was created by Kingdom Wielders. By the way, all of my stuff, this person wrote all of this. It was not mine. None of these stories are mine. I always have to say that. Disclaimer warning. Anyway. Rachel is naturally a light brunette, but she dyes her hair black because police reports still say her hair is light brown. Black is a color that blends into shadows, is easy to maintain, and won't stand out in a crowd. The camouflage is the same reason she wears a mask. Rachel carries a backpack full of supplies. These supplies include one change of clothes, basic first aid things, a needle and thread, a few basic tools for woodworking, some food, and other necessities. She does not carry the backpack everywhere with her, but she leaves it at the place that she is staying. That means it could be in an abandoned house, in some sort of ditch, a motel, or even in a tree. Rachel often frequents bars to play pool and gain cash in other ways and use to hook up with a lot of people for one-night stands. The only drug she has tried that she likes is marijuana. I'm gonna have to probably say something about that. Marijuana. And even then, only 2 puffs are as much as she will allow herself, considering how much she has broken the law already. She says, why not? Rachel's main weapon consists of a breaking wheel, 3 wooden spikes along one side, and a knife from 1920, made in 1917, a family heirloom. In high school, she took several woodworking classes and worked for a stage crew. Due to this, she is able to make her wheels and made her mask. Rachel feeds off of emotions of others around her. She has so many facts, Jesus. Her birthday is on September 15th, and she's 22 years old. She was born in Lancaster, Georgia. Her height is 5'4", and she weighs at 160 pounds. The reason why she dislikes being drunk or overly drugged is because it weakens her ability to keep her great-grandmother's spirit away, and makes her far more easily influenced by the emotion of those around her, and makes her less fit to flee. Rachel is a petty thief. She steals clothes to wear while she's stalking a victim, the dye she uses to keep her hair black, and other things she needs. Rachel uses her wheel because she enjoys torture. She also finds that her signature style makes others afraid. The dread they feel upon walking up tied to it gives her pleasure. There is no specific reason why she uses it. When researching torture, she came across it and liked it. She could have easily selected anything else at the time. Rachel's black leather jacket was a gift from her mother, and she considers it her most prized possession. Whenever Rachel becomes nervous, she will actually pull at the bottom eyelid of her glass eye. When her paranoia is acting up, she clenches her upper body muscles and breathes less. Rachel suffers from... I don't even know how to pronounce that. Fear of impaired breathing or suffocation, and paranoid personality disorder. Interesting. Powers. Rachel's psychic abilities include keeping her grandmother from contacting her, sensing auras of others after concentration, manipulating her own aura, having cryptic clairvoyant dreams, having clairvoyant visions so real she mistakes them for memories, and sensing auras up to 15 feet away from her. Though she cannot tell how many living beings are in a certain direction, she can tell how many dead beings are. In terms of physical abilities and powers, Rachel isn't all that strong. However, she did run track, making her an exceptionally fast runner. That's very interesting. Relationships. Darcy Downs, which is Rachel's mother. Rachel loves her parents, but her mom especially. Even though she was terrified of Rachel because of her great-grandmother, she still made an effort. Lewis Downs. She loved her father as well, but he spoke to her only when needed. Victoria Richards, Rachel's great-grandmother. Rachel holds a special animosity towards her great-grandmother. She was the one who made her parents afraid of her, raised her to extract revenge, and wanted her to kill both herself and her parents when it was over. Victoria is the reason Rachel ripped out her eye to increase her psychic powers. She used the extra boost to put the spirit somewhat under her control and keep her away. Now we're on to her origin story. Rachel's grandmother, Victoria, was a woman who possessed a peculiar gift. She was a medium. When the mayor of their small town murdered a young girl, the girl's spirit weighed on her until she told the whole town. A few days later, she was mugged and had both her eyes removed. She became bedridden with depression. Her husband came to despise the new attitude of his wife and ordered prosthetics in her original eye color. When she wouldn't have them, he snapped and had his friends hold her down while he forced them into her sockets. That night she killed herself. Her daughter was the first to find her and forever blamed herself because she sat in her bedroom listening to her mother scream for help. Her daughter later in life became an alcoholic who told Darcy the story. Darcy never told Rachel, so when her 5-year-old, possessed temporarily by Victoria, told her the story, she became frightened. As Rachel grew and began killing small animals, her family's fear of her only grew. They never tried to go for help because Victoria's spirit threatened to kill the girl if they did. As she grew, she was coached every step of the way into being a machine of revenge by her great-grandmother. She made slightly above average grades. Her friends made friends she didn't really care about, stayed at a friend's home whose father was a police officer, and extracted information from him by saying she wanted to be just like him. A week after graduation, Rachel went into the attic and unlocked a small wooden box as Victoria's spirit screamed and tried to take her over. Inside the box was one of the prosthetics that had been forced on Victoria. The other was buried with her husband, along with the same knife that she had used to kill herself. Rachel removed her right eye in order to strengthen her psychic powers, enough to block out her grandmother and wear her prosthetic in that eye as a final FU. Detective Howie McFarlane was the one to put all the pieces together in a way that caught the police's attention. They were very close to arresting her several times. She would never let them, however, as she would rather take her own life. When traveling near her hometown, she was hunted down and attacked by the police dog of the cop she got info from as a child. She loved the dog and was very hesitant to kill it. She suffered several deep wounds before bringing herself to kill him. All the people related to that town have already been killed, but Rachel continues to kill occasionally as she formed an addiction to the feeling of having another human's fate in her hands. And now we have her actual story. I know, right? Hi, Bippy. Um, this is going to be a very, very long story, so buckle up. My name is Detective Hallie Lucio McFarlane. I work as a freelance investigator for those who are willing to pay. Trust me when I say there are people willing to pay me to track down their long-lost cousins or missing children. About a month ago, however, I was approached by a man who didn't seek me for either of the aforementioned reasons, but to hunt down the person who had taken his wife from him. Events that followed are probably related to the biggest failure in my career to date, but out of sheer idiocy, I have decided to recount them here and now for personal reasons. Maybe one day I'll be able to show this to my wife and finally explain why it is I started locking the doors and windows ritualistically each night before bed. Okay, bye Shikai. You can always listen to just fall asleep. I know that my voice is very calming, so if you need it. Bye girlie! That introduction aside, I was packing up to head out for lunch from my office when the man approached me. By approached, I mean he forced his way into my office and demanded to see me before I left. Seeing the large wad of cash he pulled from his pocket, I promptly decided that whatever it was he wanted was definitely worth my time. I rehung my faced brown trench coat on the rack in the corner of the room behind my desk and took a seat in my chair, motioning for him to do the same in one of the two positioned in front of me. The man's features relaxed as the stress of possibly not catching me on time melted away, and he dumped himself into the barely plush fabric of my cheap office seating. Jeez. I recall looking him over once. He didn't seem to come for money at the time. His clothes were wrinkled from some sort of physical activity from which the sweat around his armpits was still drying. He was in need of a shave badly, and dark circles hung under his swollen eyes. One far more enlarged and appearing to blacken. Rough night? I smiled at him. You could say that again, he mumbled. He gave me a short recount of his night's events, the drinking, the arguments, the bar fight. His summary explained quite a bit of why he was so disheveled, but I didn't get the answer as for why he hadn't been sleeping until he moved on to why he was there. His name was Scott Lawson, a tax accountant from a state away who'd researched me online and decided I was the best candidate for what he needed. I need you to. He struggled with tears as he spoke. Find someone for me. I was used to this reaction from people at this point. I nodded my head in false sympathy and bade him to continue. The explanation he wove was the tale that followed. A few years back he met a girl named Lindsay, and over time became smitten by her. They married about a year later and had been living their happily ever after until her untimely death a few weeks prior to our meeting. The cop had determined it was a murder, but the now widowed husband was sure that they weren't doing all they could to solve the case, which is where he wanted me to come in and save the day. The pay was good, so I bid the blonde a good day and put in a call with his county police department in an attempt to get my hands on the files involved in the case. Obtaining what I needed proved easier than I expected. Apparently the force was busy with a large drug bust and was more than happy to have eager eyes working on it, so they could save manpower. The file arrived a few days later after going through the proper routes, and soon enough I held copies of the documents and pictures taken at the scenes in my hands. The images I saved for last, deciding to read the coroner's case of death first. It was simply stated as hemorrhaging due to blunt force trauma inflicted by the femur of an old man found at the crime site. The rest of the file was full of basic information on the girl, such as her name, age, weight, blood type, and other trivial things that didn't catch my eye. I skimmed over it and moved on to the pictures as I popped a piece of gum in my mouth in boredom. This would be my first real look at the case, as the sob-stricken testimony of the husband was biased at best. The pictures of the autopsy were normal, but the pictures taken at the crime scene were what caught my eye. The young and beautiful Lindsay Lawson was folded around a wooden wheel of some sort, her hands and legs tied together on one side and her body stripped naked on the other. The body of her midsection and thighs were littered with deep bruises showing where the blood had gathered within her due to gravity. The femur had been left next to her body as a present from her murderer. What specifically I found interesting about these photos was the wheel to which she was tied. The wooden wheel looked handcrafted, as if the maker had lack of tools to work with. Bits of splinter were poking out here and there, with the pegs broken in several places from being hit a bit too hard. Along one side there was 3 wooden spikes poked out from the wheel. I'm so confused. One on either side of her arms, and the other behind her head. I'd never seen a construction like that before. It was a real wheel turner. I decided to try Google, the answerer of all my important questions. What I found was more unsettling than knowing forensics had discovered that the femur used to murder Lindsay belonged to her great-grandfather. There was such things in existence around the Middle Ages as a breaking wheel or a Catherine's wheel. The difference between that a Catherine's wheel had blades or spikes along the outside edge, much like half of the wheel found at the crime scene. They were commonly used for torture way back then. And the idea of some sick bastard playing out Dungeons and Dragons fantasies on unsuspecting people chilled me a little bit. This wasn't my usual kind of case, and just looking at the autopsy photos had been enough to make my insides churn slightly. I was exasperated, a woman beaten to death with the bone of her ancestor in the name of medieval torture. I let out a shaky sigh before I had an epiphany. Jesus Christ, I can't say that word. A memory pushed to the back of my mind due to irrelevance to my life at the time. I remembered reading in the papers about a week before Lindsay's death of another corpse found killed on a wheel. However, I had to look for the article once more to learn that the individual had been chained to a wall and beaten into the spikes with a metal pipe instead. I turned back to Google and put in the generics the 2 murderers shared. I was surprised by what I found. The murderer from my town, for which I had been looking for, wasn't on the first page of the new results, and as I scrolled I counted 2 more news stories of similar deaths, each death involving a wheel, though all having died in somewhat different ways. It seemed too good to be true at the time, that no one else had made this sort of connection, but then again, the more I dug, the more I found out why. The papers and the news had done their jobs in each city. That much was sure. But just as I glanced over the article on the murder in my local neighborhood, I found that many people had not done the same. There were plenty of conspiracies floating around the web. I frowned. Conspiracies based on evidence, and likely true in this case, were still conspiracies and unlikely to attract the attention of the police. Unfortunately for the families involved, the answer they seemed to keep getting was to be patient. Each of the murders happened in a place where the police forces were being pulled in as many directions as a dog walker on a weekday. Mostly drugs, but there were a few where robberies and other such things were taking center stage. It was possible that they simply hadn't been able to give the cases attention that was needed. I decided then that I would call and request the files to any similar murder reports I came across. That is a tongue twister. Try to say murder reports. I received most of the ones for which I asked, and word got around from task force to task force that I was on the hunt. Due to the police grapevine, the resistance I met dropped considerably, and it would later lead me to seeing my first dead body in the flesh. At first I assumed the killer picked these locations based on the crime rates as an attempt to help cover their tracks. I was wrong, very wrong. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, I read and reread the case files, matching bits and pieces of this and that between the murders. Before long, I was certain that we were dealing with a serial killer, and presented by my findings to the offices that from which I received the files. The other detectives went over my work, and within a few days, most of them were on board. DNA evidence found a few of the crime scenes got pushed to priority, and soon we knew who our serial murderer was. It turned out we found her DNA to be a match from a willfully given sample back when a neighbor of theirs was accusing the girl for the disappearance of their German Shepherd. We know now that they were right, as the owners of the property gave us permission to dig up the backyard when several animal corpses of varying sizes and decay rates were found. Rachel Margaret Downs graduated high school a week before her disappearance from her meager home. Over that time that she lived with her parents, she apparently caused them some extreme paranoia on top of obvious trickery to make her parents believe she had some form of higher power. Hey, we read that! I was allowed to sit in behind the two-way mirror as an officer interrogated Mrs. Downs. She told a vast ghost story about a woman who could see the dead committing suicide and possessing her daughter. I felt a wave of anguish. Obviously, this lady was crazy, and that crazy ran in the family, meaning that an insanity plea was in our near future when we caught the girl. It pained me to know that she'd got off on a lighter sentence due to it, but justice was justice, and I had taken personal interest in this case. My wife, on the other hand, had taken up complaining about my habit of reading the case files at dinner. It was starting to irk her to levels anew, but she didn't understand how invested I still am. Because of my work, we were hops and leaps closer to catching this son of who was going to murder God knows how many more people until she was out there. While she was out there. Oh my God, please help me. My thoughts were constantly circling around her case, trying to look in every nook for some key detail I had missed. News stations started broadcasting the story, and people were still put on high alert. Search teams after search team scoured the areas. What word is that? The areas while she reportedly had been seen. Every time they came back empty-handed or having just found a campsite of hers. I was called in to work with some investigators at the station where I got Lindsay's file when I was presented with a connection I hadn't seen coming, though it was right in front of my face. Every victim of the wheel-running murderer, or so the news had taken to naming her, had been the direct offspring to people who lived in a small town named Hogsdale, about 20 miles from Spearfish, South Dakota, in 1920, which just so happened to be the year Rachel's great-grandmother had committed suicide. When I went home that evening, my mind recounted the tale Mrs. Downs had told. Apparently, according to her mother, you could just say according to her. Okay, I'm not trying to make fun of the person that wrote this, but that did not make sense to me. According to the mother, the woman had been able to converse with the dead and accused the mayor of murdering a woman. A few days later, she was mugged by a group of men who removed her eyes and were never caught. The woman became bedridden with depression and an unwillingness to adapt that caused her husband to hate her. In an attempt to brighten the situation, he had 2 glass eyes made to match her original ones and forced them into her empty sockets when she refused them. A few days later, she killed herself by slitting her own throat, and her daughter was the first one to find her body. Apparently, the family managed to collect the knife and eyes from the police department way back then, buried one with the husband, and kept both the knife and other eye in a box in the attic, before they awoke to Rachel's screams. They had ventured into the same storage area to find their daughter had taken them both, ripped out her right eye, and put her grandmother's glass eye in its place. The picture was becoming clearer with each step we took, and as far as I was concerned, little Miss Alice in Wonderland was going to go away for a long, long time. A few days later, I was invited to come to a recently discovered crime scene left behind by the same little miss. The crime scene was in the midst of some forest not too far along from the town where her great-grandmother had lived. On the way there, I was briefed on how all the graves around that area had recently been dug up and desecrated, aside for one from which the femur that had killed Lindsay Lawson had been taken. It turned out that man had been the mayor of the town that the deceased old lady had accused of murder. By this point, I had adjusted to looking at the photographs of dead bodies that had unsettled me when the case first began. I was in no way ready for the horror that awaited me in the forest, beyond the police tape, the shuffling bodies and camera flashes that laid in the river. It was shallow, about knee deep, but that was apparently all our mischievous Rachel had needed to do her deed. I arrived with the medical researchers and was one of the first to know the assumed cause of death for the unfortunate teenager that they found. They dragged the body out of the river by the time we walked up, and I had to stop and catch my breath so I didn't forsake possible evidence with my own stomach bile. The thing about corpses left in water is that when they bloat, everything goes downhill. The stench was so overwhelming that I was supplied with a small towel to cover my face and allow me to get closer to the remains. What was left hardly looked like a person to me. Every inch was swollen and pale. Bits here and there darkened by the still blood that no longer coursed through the veins. Like a few other victims, this one was fully clothed, which saved me quite a few nightmares. As the medical team gathered around, I peered over the shoulder of one of them in an attempt to look at the girl's face. However, it was covered by a thick, soaking wet burlap sack that appeared to be tied tightly around the water-swollen neck of the body. The field medics cut carefully at the bag, not wanting to rupture the skin underneath, for it would burst if cut. When they removed it, we were greeted by two bulging, widespread eyes. I had to back away at that point. It was just all a little too real for me. Obviously, the cause of death ended up being drowning. Apparently, Rachel had covered her head and rolled her downstream till she died and then left her there. It still sounds like an awful way to go for me. I walked away from the crime scene and into the deeper section of the forest. I don't know how far I walked, but I remember that the shadows grew long around me as the sound of people faded. I feel the need to reiterate at this point that I've never been one for the supernatural. I never believed in ghosts or goblins or even the tooth fairy, but I can honestly say that what happened next changed my mind. Whether or not it's true or I'm slowly going insane is still up for debate. As I walked, a pair of black boots registered in my peripheral vision, then tan pants, then a black leather jacket, and finally the face of none other than Rachel Downs. I panicked as she smiled at me, not innocently, and yet not malevolently. At the same time, I wasn't armed far from it with my M1911A1 stashed safely at my hip. But I also wasn't an infiltrator or skilled in arresting criminals. My breath caught in my throat as my hand went to the gun, calculating how long it would take the others to reach me. She took a step forward and paused as I drew my weapon, pointing the slightly shaking barrel at her. "Stop where you are." She raised her hands, palms open, but the smirk didn't leave her face. She asked me if I was the one who had put it all together and only paused when I didn't respond. My job is complete anyway. Each and every one of the criminals is gone. They paid for their account through blood, just as my great-grandmother Victoria wanted. My look of disbelief prompted her to continue. "I'm sure my mother told you everything about the town, the murder, Victoria, how she raised me as her puppet, but she didn't intend me to ever backtalk. Didn't think I was smart enough to realize that if I cut my physical senses." She reached her right eye and removed the prosthetic. My psychic abilities would grow strong enough to block her out. The person in front of me truly believed what they were saying. That much was apparent, and I was too caught up in watching her every move for hostility to bother asking her to stop. In my opinion, the more distracted she was, the better. I suppose you've wondered about Catherine as well, the wheel I've come to be known for killing with. Lots of speculation going around about the one, but the answer is very simple. Torture is the least of what they deserved. Besides, having someone's life in your hands is very inappropriate feeling, isn't it, Detective? She placed her hands in her pockets idly. "Well, I've got some things to do, and I'd rather die than sit in jail with no one's company but the deceased for the rest of my natural life." Her expression turned dark, and she drew something from her pocket. "Go ahead." I trembled from head to toe as I flicked off the safety. It wasn't her of whom I was truly scared, however, but who or what was standing behind her. At first it had registered as a mass of darkness forming as she spoke, but the more I focused on the mass, the more it took form. The color shifted from black to a pale cream as it began to hover over her. The hands and neck were soaked in brown liquid that still dripped from a large gash in her throat, but despite this, she was moving. Her empty eye sockets trained on me, the flesh inside a slightly pink mess. She slowly opened her mouth, flesh ripping through stitches to reveal a dark cavern within. Before I knew it, I had unloaded my clip into the mass. One of the bullets grazed Rachel's right arm, but it wasn't enough to fatally wound her. In shock, I looked to my gun to see why it had stopped, and before I knew it, I was backed into a tree with a knife being pulled on my left shoulder. I don't quite recall what happened after that. My head just stopped. My TV just went to home screen. My own defense mechanisms caused me to black out, and when I came to, I was being loaded into an ambulance and rushed off to the nearest hospital. My colleagues assumed that I simply came face to face with her and was bested, but something bigger is going on here, something that I can't explain. I promptly pulled out after that. I gave Scott his money back, went home to my wife. I was going to get as far away from what happened as I could, forget what I saw, knowing no one will ever believe me. Except there is no running from what I saw that night. I've been religiously locking all the doors and windows before bed for weeks now. But when I woke up this morning, I found a sheet of paper on my bedside table, the gun taken from the drawer used as paperweight to get my attention. It's simple, a letter meant for me. You sleep like a log, Howie. Now that's interesting. That's very interesting. Well, that was Arcane, or Rachel Downs. Thank you for watching. Bye!